Hello and welcome back to my garden. Today I'm going to be doing something a little different than I normally do because I'm not going to be doing a project today. It is a wet, bleak, dreary day, but today I wanted to talk about getting started gardening, because now is the time. If you've thought about gardening, if you're thinking about gardening, or if you plan on starting a garden, now is really the time to start doing that. If you start thinking about planting your garden now, when the springtime comes, you'll be that much further ahead. So if you start planting or decide to start gardening in the springtime, you're a little bit behind, and depending upon where you live, your growing season may be very short. So if you're up in Wisconsin, your growing season may actually be, or Nebraska if you want to go even further north. I think Nebraska's further north. Montana, let's go Montana. We're right up the Canadian border, but your growing season may be, let's say, from June to September. That's a very short growing season. Whereas in other places in the country, for instance, me here in Eastern North Carolina, I can go from the beginning of April right up until about November, mid to late November. Again, all this depends upon weather and what Mother Nature decides to do, but that's the general rule of thumb. So I have a very extended growing season. If you live down in Florida or even further south, your growing seasons are going to be even that much longer because you don't have the risk of frost. And frost is usually what stops gardeners from gardening, because many of the plants that we like to grow are susceptible to frost. So if you're sort of on the fence, I encourage people to try gardening at the very least, because there's a lot of benefits from gardening. I'm going to touch on a few, and I'll probably mention a few others as this video goes on, because even though I have some notes written down here in my notebook, I didn't actually make like an outline nor a script. It's just the way I roll. Some of the benefits: you can learn something new, you can increase your curb appeal. So if you have a house, then maybe you want to put some new bushes, shrubs, trees, flowers, that kind of thing out in front of your house. It'll increase the curb appeal of your house. And not only that, but if you're ever thinking about selling your house, then it'll be something that will add actually a little value to the house. Buyers stop and take a second look at your house. So that's always a good thing. Depending upon what you're doing and how you're doing it, you can actually wind up saving money. And I'll touch more about that in a second. You know, you can grow your own food. If you want to grow vegetables or fruits, growing your own is always a good thing. And then there's things like mental health. Many people find it quite relaxing, find it enjoyable. It takes their mind off of things. So if you're outside with your hands in the soil, working the ground, you're relaxing just thinking about doing the one thing that it is you're doing. All right, so if you're, again, still on the fence about gardening, or if you're not sure what to do or where to start, there's a ton of resources out there. And I didn't know and or understand. When I first started gardening, I had no clue. I saw a program on television. I said, that's what I want to do, because I don't want to be in the house anymore. I got to get out of the house. I'm tired of going to work, coming home, sitting behind a computer. I sit behind a computer all day for 20 years, come home, sit behind a computer again still, play video games or watch television, and just, I'm not doing anything. What am I doing? I'm not doing it. So that was my motivation to get outside. I wanted to do something outside. And I thought gardening looks like something that looked enjoyable, but I didn't know who, what, when, where, why, and how. So I've learned a lot since. And if you're still thinking about it, maybe you have friends or family that can help you. That's always a resource. Friends, families, those are huge resources. Your local garden center and or nursery, they can also be a good resource. You walk in and say, I want to start a vegetable garden, but I don't know where to start with. Or I want to start growing flowers, but I don't know what will work around me. So going to those places is always a good thing to start with. Also, and a little bit of self-promotion here, I put together a page on my website, growinggreenfinger.com, under resources. But if you go over to that page, I have a bunch of different resources, whether it's YouTube, books, websites, things like that, that will hopefully give you. I tried to put all the information that I could think of into one place, so that if you're just starting off, that it's almost like a one-stop shop. And what I listed is not the end-all be-all. There is just a ton of websites out there, and a ton of YouTube channels, and a ton of books. But I tried to put together things that I know have helped me. And if you're an experienced gardener and you know of another channel that I didn't list, or a book or something else like that, please let me know and I'll add it to that page. So my thought was, with that page, that resources page, was just to give a place for especially new gardeners, to give them a start. So you go check it out and you go, ooh, Jason was talking about this, and maybe this book will work for me, and then you can go research the book, decide if that's what you want. Or a YouTube channel, and then like I said, there's a ton of YouTube channels out there with gardening. The next question you may be saying is, well, I want to garden, but I don't know what or where to garden. So these are important questions that you have to then start asking and that's why I said now is the time to start. When everything's cold and frozen, or it's just nothing's going to grow right now because it's just the conditions aren't right. Now is the time to do that. So you have to decide what you'd like to grow. And for me, I wanted to grow everything. So that was that was not necessarily a good thing, that I wanted to grow fruits, vegetables, I wanted to grow flowers, shrubs, I wanted to grow it all. I wanted to grow the gamut, and I still do, and that's why I have such a large garden, and it's only going to get larger over the years, hopefully. But so my recommendation to you is probably start small. And by small, I mean you could do a small raised bed, you could do an in-ground bed, but maybe in the corner of your front yard or your backyard, something along those lines, side of your house, whatever it is. And if you then can manage it and maintain it and you enjoy it, then you can start branching out from there. I'm just making a suggestion. You guys can turn around and rototill up 10 acres and then start going crazy and doing that if that's you so wish and desire. I didn't start small. I actually just started tearing up my whole front yard. Well, not my whole front yard, but large swaths of my front yard. And making very large beds, and then trying to go back and fill those beds with all the sorts of plants. And it took me a few years to get those beds pretty much filled. Had I started smaller, I think it might have been a good thing had I started smaller, because then I could have learned, and I would have taken the time to learn a little bit more as opposed to rushing ahead. And by me rushing ahead, I wound up making a lot of mistakes that now, looking back, I kind of smack myself on the head and think, oh, I shouldn't have done that, or I shouldn't have done this. Granted, making mistakes is all part of the learning experience. But if you start small, it's like when you start learning to ride a bicycle. You start with training wheels as opposed to going right onto a large mountain bike. You start slow and you work your way up to it. Again, this is just my suggestion. So, for instance, if you want to decide to start vegetable gardening, you can start off with a small 4x8 raised bed. You can do even a smaller, let's say 2 or 3 foot wide by 6 foot long, just section of your backyard or your front yard, wherever you decide to put it, and we're going to get to that in a second. But you're going to start with just a little thing, and then you're going to plant whatever vegetables that you like to eat, and that's the next suggestion. If you're going to start a vegetable garden, start with plants that you like to eat. So for instance, tomatoes, cucumbers, peas, beans, carrots. I'm probably missing a few things. So again, experienced gardeners, leave those comments below. Let me know what I might be missing, but start off with things you like. If you get at the end of the season and you feel more comfortable growing and harvesting whatever it is you're growing and harvesting, then maybe the following year you can then decide, well, I really like to try, or I was out at dinner and I tried kale and I really liked it, so maybe now I'd like to try to grow kale. So then do that, and so on. And you can grow and expand your garden once you've sort of gotten maybe a little more experience. So if you start small and you really enjoy it, then that, I think, is just going to provide you more motivation from going bigger. Now, I did mention starting small, and maybe you should start with a small 4x8 section or a corner of your backyard or front yard. This is then the next question is, what is it that you want to grow, and where do you have sun? Because many plants, vegetables particularly, need sunlight. A lot of flowers need sunlight. So for instance, if your house faces north and the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, so your back is your south, does your backyard have a lot of trees? If your backyard has a lot of trees, well, I don't think you're going to put a vegetable bed back there because it's not going to get a lot of sunlight. So you might want to put it in the front yard. And a lot of people don't think about growing something like vegetables in your front yard, and it can be done, and I think more people should do it. It's a whole nother discussion about that, and if you guys want me to delve further into that, I can. But think about where the sun lands on your property. Your house may not face directly north or south. It may be at a funny angle, but so you just have to pay attention as to where the sun rises and where the sun sets and where the sunniest part of your yard is, and that may help you then decide what it is you want to grow and where. You may not want to grow vegetables or flowers at all. You may want to grow shadier plants. So like for instance, hostas. I love hostas, and there are people on YouTube that just do nothing but shade gardens. That's their thing, because that's what they have, and they love shade gardens. A shady backyard may be perfect for you in that instance. If you just want to do a lot of hostas, coral bells, I think they're also called heuchera. There's probably a bunch of other, lily of the valley. I think that's a shady plant. Let me know in those comments below if I get any of these wrong. I keep saying that, but I want the community to sort of chime in and again, let me know if I'm getting something wrong. And if you're watching this video, please go back and look at the comments after a day or two and see if somebody made a correction to what it is I'm saying here, because they may point out things that I've missed, which I'm hoping that they do, or make corrections to things. So you know where your sun is on your property. You've decided you want to grow whatever. You can grow whatever you want. You can grow vegetables, you can grow flowers, you can grow both, you can grow just shade plants, whatever it is you want to grow. Then I would say the next thing that you have to think about or understand is your soil. And this is so important. So there's a couple of things to think about. Let's say you just want to grow vegetables and you don't know what your soil is like. Well, one of the things you could do is you could go out and get a soil test kit. You can take soil samples up to your local, I think they're called cooperatives or colleges. They'll usually test your soils for free, from my understanding. It'll give you an understanding of what your soil is, and this is important. And not only so far as things like acidity or alkaline, but your understanding should be as to, for instance, I'm going to take an example that I'm familiar with. Where I grew up and lived on Long Island in New York, it's basically a giant sandbar, which I never understood. And every year growing up in the summertime, everybody's front lawn turns brown, and I couldn't understand why until I started gardening. And then I went, oh, that's why. The answer is very simple. Basically, there's 2 to 3, maybe even 4 inches of topsoil, and the rest of it is sand. So what happens is the topsoil gets saturated with moisture, and it can only hold so much moisture, and the plants can only absorb so much moisture, i.e. lawn, grass, it's a plant, it can only absorb so much moisture, and all the rest of it just runs right through the sand. So then the grass, let's say, can't get there's no point in the grass pushing its roots down into that sand because there's no water left in that sand. So if you get rain on one day, all that the ground gets saturated, all that extra water runs through. If it only rains once a week in between Monday and Friday, then the grass winds up drying out because it needs quite a bit of water. And I'd watch people water their lawns for hours on end, and I didn't understand why. I'm like, he put so much water on his lawn, why is it turning brown? I always thought, like many of you may think, is that it's due to the heat. And that's only a partial part of it. If those plants had, let's say, a foot of topsoil, then there's some place for the roots to drive down into to collect more moisture. So therefore, the grass would stay greener longer, if that makes sense. So when I first started gardening, I had to add a lot of organic matter, and I'll touch more about that, I think, in another video. But I had to add a lot of compost and more soil to the ground to increase that depth of dirt, let's say. So when the plants push their roots out, there would be more moisture for them. So I basically increased the depth, and going from 2 to 3 inches to 6 to 8 inches by adding in a lot of soil and compost. So this way the plants have some place to push their roots into, and they can pull up that moisture as needed. You may live in an area that has heavy clay, in which case what happens with heavy clay is it holds too much moisture because the moisture doesn't move, because rainwater doesn't move through clay. Clay is a very dense material. It doesn't allow water to drain through quite as quickly. The upside to that is it does retain moisture. So if you have a longer period of in between rains, then your plants will be they'd be happier that that moisture is there within the ground. But it doesn't make for good planting with many plants, because many plants appreciate a more free draining mixture. So they appreciate some moisture in the soil, but not a lot. I don't want to get too detailed in this video, and I don't want this video to be too long, and I'm probably already going way beyond. If you're questioned about your soil, you don't know what your soil type is like, there's a couple of things you can do to fix that, and I'm going to talk about that in a future video. If you guys like this video and want me to talk about that, I'll talk about a couple other things. But if you don't want to test your soil, and if you're in question about your soil, but you want to grow vegetables, one of the most common things nowadays to do is buy a raised bed. You can get them tall, short, made out of metal, made out of wood. You can make your own. There's a plethora of different options when it comes to raised beds. You can get a raised bed, and then you could fill it with all sorts of good nutrients and good mixtures that are out there, whether there's something pre-mixed or you can mix your own. Again, we can discuss that more in a later video if you so wish and desire. And then plant your crops into that. Again, whatever it is you want to grow. There's a book out there called Veg in One Bed, and it's written by Hugh Richards, and he tells you how you can grow a ton of different crops all in one 4x8 raised bed over the course of the growing season. And he kind of gives you a step by step, which is really awesome. So again, if you're thinking about starting a garden, or if you decided you want to start gardening, you just want to start small, I think that would be a great resource if you were wanting to grow vegetables. If you want to grow flowers, again, you can grow them in a raised bed. You can grow many different plants in raised beds. So that's an easy way to start gardening. And if you decided that you don't want to garden, then if you've tried it and you decide, I don't want to do this, you can just remove that raised bed, spread that soil out, and move on. So let's say you live in an apartment, you can do house plants. You could do plants on your balcony if you're so lucky to have a balcony, in pots. There is a book, I believe it's called, I can't remember the name of it, it's by Klaus Dalby. Klaus Dalby. I think he's Dutch from the Netherlands there, and he talks about doing all sorts of container plants and all of the different things that you can grow in containers, which is really fun. If you want, you can check that out. That's a fun resource. But I'm sure, and I've seen a few other YouTube channels where they talk about doing vegetables in pots. So you don't necessarily have to have a piece of property. Again, if you're in an apartment, you can if you have a balcony, sunny spot where you can grow vegetables, you could do that as well. So then the next part of this whole wanting to garden is, where do you want to start from? Do you want to grow your own plants? Do you want to buy plants that are already small, like I said, from a garden center or a big box store, and stick them into the ground? These are all options you have nowadays, which is really awesome. If you want to start from seed, you got to decide what it is you want to grow. Then you can go out and buy those seeds. There's a ton of online resources, or if you go to your local garden centers or even big box store, they're on sale right now. If you want to grow things like vegetables and you don't want to grow from seed, but you just want to buy the plant, I've seen where many box stores now will have a small tomato plant already in a can, ready to go, lettuces, cucumbers, the whole 9 yards, and you just buy them, go home, stick them in the ground, and you're off to the races. But those won't be available until closer to your area's last freeze date. Speaking of your area's last freeze date, one of the things that's important to know is when will your last freeze be in your area? Nowadays with the internet, it's super easy to look up. So you just go type into Google or whatever your favorite search engine is when is my last freeze for the year? And it'll tell you, and I think this year for me, it's April 5th. This is a guess from the National Weather Service generally. They look at all sorts of computer stuff and models and blah, 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 and then they say, okay, this is the date we think it is going to be. So last year for me, it was April 1st, when actually my last freeze happened in mid-March. So I went a couple of weeks without any sort of freezes, and then once April 1st hit, I was like, all right, well, I don't see it in the future forecast, and we haven't had freezes in 2 weeks, so I'm pretty sure we're safe. So if you're up in Montana and you have a very short growing season, this is very important to know, because as soon as that last expected freeze date passes, you may want to give yourself a week, but after that I would start putting plants into the ground, because you have a very short growing season. So the sooner you can get the plants in the ground, the sooner they can start growing, and the sooner you can start benefiting from them. So these are all sort of the basics I think I can think of off the top of my head, and that I have written down so far as getting started gardening. If you've stumbled across this video and you're still on the fence about this, now's the time to start really thinking about this, so that if you do decide to start gardening, again, there's a ton of resources on YouTube. There's my resource page over my website. There's a ton of books out there. So now's the time to really start figuring it out. Maybe grandma always grew salvia, or maybe dad always grew eggplant, or maybe aunt so-and-so always grew whatever it was. You can then decide maybe that's something you want to do. You could research it a little bit on your own, and you could figure out, you know, again, where do you want to start and where are you going to plant those within your yard. So if you guys like this video, again, if you're an experienced gardener, you think I've missed out on things, please leave those below. Leave those comments below. If you guys do like this video, give it a thumbs up. And if you really, enough of you like this video, then maybe I'll do another one like this, and we'll talk more about your ground, the soil beneath your feet, because this is so important that many people don't think about. I still have a friend who doesn't understand, and I keep trying to educate him on this. So maybe I'll do a video just to educate my friend and help him have a better understanding of what's beneath our feet and why it's so important. So with all that being said, looks like it's going to rain again. I want to wrap up this video, and I'm going to catch you on the next one. Bye-bye.